Good evening. My name is Rob Leyden. I'm a Director Emeritus here at the Center, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the third Chatham Marconi Speaker Series presentation of 2025. We're very fortunate to have Morgan Pirozzi from the Center for Coastal Studies with us tonight. Morgan's presentation will be about the history of disentanglement, what a successful response looks like, and how members of the public can assist rescuers. Entanglement in fishing gear is a rising global concern and one of the leading causes of death among several large whale species. These whales can carry gear for weeks, if not months, before succumbing to injury, exhaustion, starvation, or infection. Since 1984, the Center for Coastal Studies has freed more than 200 large whales and other marine mammals from life-threatening entanglements, using techniques developed by staff here in Provincetown. Disentanglement events are dynamic and logistically challenging, often requiring teams with specialized skills, sets, and equipment. A few things about Morgan. She graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a BS in Environmental Science and studied humpback whale acoustics at Duke. She first came to the Center for Coastal Studies as an intern with the Right Whale Ecology Program and then stayed on with MAER. What does MAER stand for?
It's Marine Animal Entanglement
Okay.
Response.
Previously, she worked studying the behavior of bottlenose dolphins in Shark Bay, Western Australia, and on whale watches in Maine. And following her presentation, Morgan will answer your questions. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Morgan Pirozzi.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being here on this foggy evening to hear me talk about my work. Like you said, I'm Morgan Pirozzi. I'm a member of the Marine Animal Entanglement Response team at the Center for Coastal Studies. And I'm here to talk a little bit about my work and some of the history of it. And all the pictures and images you'll see are under all of these permits. And without further ado, I will go ahead and get started. So talking about entanglement, what exactly is that? Entanglement in this instance is anytime an animal is either towing or anchored to fishing gear of any type, whether that's currently fished or derelict, that's line, netting, rope, or other fishing material around any area of the body. This is happening as a global issue, and nowadays entanglements are a major source of anthropogenic mortality and injuries among large whales worldwide. And unfortunately, oftentimes, human intervention is required to remove this gear from the animal if they cannot shed it themselves. And entanglement can occur anywhere that whales or large whale species overlap with fishing. So here are some common examples of types of fishing setups. This is an example of a trawl that you would see here in a lot of the waters off Cape Cod. So at the top of the water column, you have a buoy with a flag marking the location of the fishing gear set. And then you have a vertical line that runs from the buoy down to the ocean floor where the trap is. And then between each subsequent trap, there is a line connecting it to the previous. So this is another example of common fishing gear. This is an example of a gill net setup. So there's a surface system with a buoy at the top, again marking the beginning of the gear set, a vertical line that runs down to an anchor, and then a line that's connecting it to the gill net itself. A gill net catches fish with a net that has weights at the bottom that keeps it attached to the ocean floor and then floats along the top to keep it vertically oriented. And a whale can get caught in any part of these setups. They can get caught in the surface system with the buoy, it can get caught in the vertical line, it can get caught in the anchor, it can get caught in the netting. We've seen it all, they can do it all. Even if you think you can't pick that up, they find a way. They're very, very funky animals like that. And why does that happen? For a number of reasons, but like I said, entanglement can take place anywhere that marine animals and fishing gear overlap. This is a particular issue for whales, which are migratory species. For whales like humpbacks, they move from their feeding grounds up here in the northeast down to their breeding grounds in the southeast. And because they migrate, they have to cover a large swath of area. They have to traverse through highly trafficked areas to get to those breeding and feeding grounds each year. So if you're a whale, imagine you're the size of a school bus, and you have to navigate through this waterway to get from one place to the next. And you're going to try to navigate this waterway without interacting with any of these buoys. Each yellow dot here marks the top of a gear set. And then underneath that gear set, there could be anything, any of those gill nets. It could be a singular pot. There could be a trawl. And you are the size of a school bus, and you have to try to make it through this picture without touching any of that. So it's not because they're particularly creative in wanting to pick up these gear sets. It's accidental. They're coming in contact with a lot of anthropogenic activity. And then for certain whale species, because of the impacts of climate change and shifting food, they might be pushed into areas of greater human presence that they're not previously exposed to. So locally here in the North Atlantic and the Gulf of Maine, these are a subset of the species that we see here. Off the waters of Cape Cod, we see fin whales, sei whales, the humpback, minkies, the North Atlantic right whale, which are critically endangered, as well as a number of sea turtle species. In the summer, between May and November, we get leatherback turtles that push into the area. And everything you see on the screen has been entangled. The most commonly reported are humpbacks and North Atlantic right whales, but we do get a lot of turtles. One summer we had upwards of 50 entangled turtles reported around the Cape. So some history about the center. We've been studying whales since the 70s. We also maintain the Gulf of Maine humpback whale catalog, which allows us to track individual whales. We can identify them. If you've been on a whale watch, you probably know this, but by markings on the underside of their flukes. For whales, this is like a fingerprint. We can use this to know who they are as an individual, a singular type of whale. And we see them over multiple seasons, multiple years, and can track them over the course of their lives. We also ID them off of marks and shapes of their dorsals, and this can take, a while to track down for a specific whale, but we do have a very expansive catalog that goes back to the 70s, like I said. So this whale on the right is a whale that some of you might know, but this is Salt. She's the most well-studied whale in the Gulf of Maine. She's been cited numerous times, is very well documented, very beloved by many whale watches and many people who work on whales here in the Gulf of Maine. And she's known as the Grand Dam of Stellwagen Bank, and this is actually her family tree, so we can trace many, many whales that we study back to her, and we know it's very rare among lots of large whale species to be able to know this much detail about them. You know their life history, you know their mother, you know their grandmother, you know their children, you can know their sex, and you can also know a lot about their life history, such as any injuries or issues they might have, such as entanglement. And being able to identify these whales is incredibly important for our work because often entanglement happens unseen. Very little times do you actually see the moment where a whale comes in contact with gear and becomes entangled. So this is actually a clip of a whale that we knew very well, a whale named Cardew that we had seen across multiple years becoming entangled in fishing, or in I believe, an anchor line back in 2018. So this was the moment that she came into contact with gear. Very rare that you actually see that happen. And unfortunately, Cardew was never seen again after this entanglement. So like I said, entanglements often happen unseen, so we can detect them in a number of ways, but we also, because we can know these whales as a singular individual, you can detect how they might have become entangled through scar studies. So a whale that survives an entanglement will likely carry gear with them after the event, which can cause injuries and scars that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. So this part of the animal in their anatomy is called the peduncle. This is where their tail meets their body. And this area is almost always involved, or not almost always, but often involved in entanglements in some capacity. And if it's not involved, it's usually will still become scarred through contact with rope, through swimming. And so we can detect past entanglements through the presence of scars. So through scar studies, we can monitor how often entanglements are happening in the population, even if we are not documenting gear actively on animals. And so using these scar studies, we found that about 65% of our Gulf of Maine humpbacks have been entangled at least one time in their lives. And of that 65%, 15 to 20% of them are getting entangled each year. So the population, this time about 3,000 animals in the Gulf of Maine, 15 to 20% of them getting entangled each year. And of that small percentage, only about 15 or 10% of them are reported to us at the response network. So a large number of animals getting entangled each year, really small percentage of them that are being seen or documented. And this problem is seen across, again, all whale species that are interacting with fishing gear. For right whales, which are critically endangered, this number is almost 90%. Almost 90% of right whales have been entangled at least one time in their life. So the impacts of entanglement, like I said, lethal threat to a lot of these whale species, leading cause of death for a number of them. But how exactly can entanglement kill an animal? So one of the impacts, immediately drowning upon contact with the gear. If it prevents them from reaching the surface, being able to breathe, they can drown while in the gear. Like you saw in that video, they often also are thrashing, trying to free themselves. They can panic and orient themselves in such a way that they drown like that pretty quickly upon contact with the entanglement. But more likely, the gear will stay with them. They'll either break it off or become anchored and be entangled over weeks or months and have more drawn out long-term effects, such as starvation. So if they are wrapped in a way that they can't feed, whether it's inhibiting them from opening their mouths or keeping them from being successful in digestion, they can starve. The gear can also will often be an injury that can get infected. They can lead to chronic infection. They can die that way. Or they can die through a trauma, such as bleeding out. This is pretty common. We can see ways in which they get wrapped in a gear that is causing a really deep injury. And also this is a particular threat for calves. So if you get entangled while you're a calf, you have a wrap around a body part that is not going to grow with you. So as you, as an animal, are getting bigger, that rope is just going to keep staying the same size, cutting off your access. So if it's wrapped around your fluke or your tail or a flipper, that can actually get completely cut off. So how did the center get involved in disentanglement specifically? So in 1984, center researchers came across a whale that they knew. This was a whale named Ibis. They had seen her before. She was in the catalog. They came across her in August covered in gear. And so they tried to formulate a plan to figure out if there was a way that they could help her somehow. In Canada, they had worked on trying to free entangled animals, but only animals that were anchored. So sometimes you're held down by enough gear that you're essentially trapped in place. You're anchored like you would be if you were tied. But this was a free-swimming animal, so an animal that was not anchored, that was swimming freely, dragging the gear with her. And there had never ever been a disentanglement of a free-swimming animal. So team in August came across Ibis entangled, trying to figure out what they could do to free her. And while they were deliberating, trying to launch a response, Ibis dove and was not seen again. And at the time, because there was so little knowledge of entanglement, the team assumed she drowned and died there. Fortunately for Ibis, she did not drown, was seen again in fall of 1984. At the time, they did not know that it was the same whale. So seeing her twice now, they were trying to come up with a plan, like what will we do if we see her again? What can we do? We can't get close to her. We can't get caught up. We can barely get within range to even try to do anything. And members of this team at the time were David Matilla, one of our founding members, as well as Stormy Mayo, another CCS founding member. And Stormy's father was actually a former whaler. And when they were talking to him about, we have these whales, we can't slow them down, what would you do? He said, well, at my time, we would harpoon them and keg them, which you would stick a harpoon in them, and attached to the harpoon would be barrels of drag. And so they're like, okay, well, obviously we're not going to harpoon them, but the idea of kegging seemed like it could be possible. And so on Thanksgiving Day, 1984, the team was out of Provincetown Harbor, and it came across Ibis for the third time. And this time they were able to launch a boat, and using some of these techniques that they had discussed, they were able to actually get in close enough to launch the first disentanglement attempt of a free-swimming whale. And so this is Stormy Mayo at the bow of the boat, leaning over. This is her peduncle, like I talked about. So they're at her tail, and he's reaching down to try to grab the rope with his bare hands. So that's her fluke right underneath the boat. And there's another whale just hanging out in the way. And this is Thanksgiving Day, so November on the Cape, very cold. And they're out there doing the first disentanglement of a free-swimming whale. So, like they had mentioned, kegging was an old whaling technique. They knew they weren't going to use harpoons, but they liked the idea of trying to slow down the whale. And so they actually had a foldable anchor, and they used that as kind of a makeshift grapple. And what that did was be able to grab onto the gear that was trailing off of Ibis, and they could use that as a type of drag to slow her down. If any of you guys have seen Jaws, it's very similar to where they use the barrels to try to slow down the shark. And so that makeshift anchor was actually the precursor to our modern day grapples. So we still use these today, and we still use the kegging technique, which again is an old whaling technique, as a common method and procedure in our disentanglements. A lot of mistakes were made this day, first time ever doing this type of work. First off, there's not a lot of documentation, not a lot of photos or videos of the event. A lot of safety precautions that were not taken this day that we definitely would, but a lot of the major concepts stuck, such as having a standby vessel, so somebody who spots the whale and can stay with them until responders arrive, using a grapple to keg the animal, pulling up in an inflatable boat, so a soft top boat, and then using knives to cut away the line. So on Thanksgiving Day, Ibis was freed. So after Ibis's release, there started coming in more and more reports of other entangled animals around the Cape. So between 1984, this first release, in the late 90s, Stormy Mayo, David Matilla released around 50 different whales in the Capes and surrounding waterways. But the calls started coming in from further and further away. People were hearing about this team doing this type of work, and were saying, hey, I have an entangled whale in my state, further south or further north. And this culminated in 1996. Somebody called and said, hey, I have an entangled right whale off of Florida. I need you guys to come. So the team was part of this response in Florida, and they were like, well, this is getting out of hand. We cannot be covering the entire East Coast. We are a small team out of Provincetown. And so in 1996, in combinations with NIMS and the federal government, CCS helped form the Atlantic Large Whale Disentanglement Network, which was the right whale incident highlighted the need of having specialized teams up and down the East Coast in specific locations. And so they established this network with the goal of creating protocols for responders and safety practices for everybody to make it a bit more standardized. Also, it would help narrow down who should be doing this type of work, who should be appropriately trained. There's a lot of things that are kind of prerequisites to doing this type of work, such as level-headedness, the ability to handle a boat, well around an animal with line in the water, knowledge of whale behavior, and the ability to work under pressure. Obviously, these are high-pressure situations. And so they established a type of promotion potential among responders that's called the leveling system. So we have levels 1 through 5. You have increasing responsibility as you go up. It also allows certain people to be permitted to do certain activities. And the idea is you would work with more experienced people to gain more experience, and you're kind of training and teaching as you move up. And we still use this kind of leveling system today among the response network. And they also wanted to strategically locate teams in areas where they were seeing high levels of entanglement. So areas that were important to the whales, such as the right whale breeding grounds off of the southeast, off of Florida and Georgia, and then the feeding grounds up in the northeast by Cape Cod, Canada, Gulf of St. Lawrence. So after 1996, this is a chart that shows the number of confirmed cases in the late 70s to the present day. And you can see after 1996, a lot more eyes in the water, a lot more awareness of the entanglement issue, and so we saw a lot more confirmed cases. And this is actually just kind of showing the success of the network and the number of cases that were being discovered and responded to. Not all of these cases were responded to, but all of these were documented in some way. So why do we do this work? Why are we having disentanglement teams? Why are we expanding it? Number of reasons. Firstly, for conservation of the species. Like I was saying, entanglement is a huge threat. For a number of large whale species, it's a significant risk of extinction for populations like the North Atlantic right whale. At the moment, there are only about 370 of them. So the death of one whale brings them even closer to extinction. So if one whale is entangled, particularly if that's a calving female, there's a huge disproportionate impact on the population. So returning these individuals back into the population is a really big conservation bonus. But on top of that, we care about the welfare of the animals as an individual. Entanglement is incredibly painful. It's life-threatening. We want to be able to help them. We want to be able to see them be successful. We want to see them bringing back calves, or if they are a calf, grow up to be full-grown whale. Disentanglement also allows for a lot of data collection. So we help understanding the problem of entanglement. Why is it happening? Where is it happening? and what we can do to stop it from happening, methods of prevention. But also having trained disentanglement teams and entanglement responders is helpful for the public safety. The work is really dangerous, so if you have someone who is a professional that you can call, it keeps a member of the public from trying to do the work themselves and putting themselves in any danger. So our team, like I said, is pretty small, but we all work with each other to respond to these types of things. So here are some photos from different types of responses over the years from our team. This is our boat Ibis, 35-foot inflatable with the sponsons inflatable, not really, solid hull. This is a specifically modified vessel to do this type of work. Like I said, large whale entanglement response is really difficult and demanding. It requires long hours, lots of time on the water, and an enormous amount of specialized training. These positions in other networks are usually voluntary, but for people who are trained professionals, few and far between to be able to do this type of work. People who are trained are of a specific type of knowledge. You know a lot about whale behavior, you know a lot about boats, but they have specific training to do this type of work and familiarity with other entanglements. Our team is usually 4 to 6 people with differing levels of experience. And whale disentanglement is a federally protected act, so no one should be trying to work with entangled animals or disentangle animals themselves without federal authorization or working with an entanglement responder. So now I'll go through some of the steps of a response. We've heard a lot about doing the work, but what exactly does that mean? And so I'll go through it step by step with some pictures. The first step in any entanglement response is entanglement detection. So you can't respond to anything if you don't know that a whale is entangled. So how do you detect entanglement? The first one is kind of the most obvious, gear on the body. If you're seeing line, if you're seeing netting, if you're seeing rope of any kind on a whale, or restricting a body part, trailing behind it, that's a pretty obvious indication that that whale is entangled. But there are some more subtle signs, such as injuries, fresh scarring, fresh wounds, blood. All these things might indicate that there's something causing that, which might be a more cryptic entanglement, or poor body condition. Whales that are skinny, you might see their ribs a little bit. A presence of high cyanide loads. Cyanids are like whale lice. They show up when the whales are sick. So any of those things can indicate that there is a possible threat. So this is an example of an obvious entanglement. It may not seem super obvious, but on the right side of the picture, there's the whale's head. And behind it, you can see lots of multicolored lines leading to buoys and a jumble on its back. So moving at speed at the surface, throwing lots of white water, pretty obvious entanglement. This is what it might look like under the water. So all those buoys are going to a different line. It's going to a different part of the animal. And it's twisted in a different way. So even though it's super busy at the top, it's even more busy under the surface. This is something a little less obvious, would be a whale trailing gear in some capacity. You know, seeing a whale sitting next to a buoy in the summer is kind of dime a dozen. They're always next to buoys. But if that buoy starts moving with the whale kind of slowly, that might be cause for a closer look. And for us, if we saw something like this, we would definitely kind of approach, see if we can see any signs like those I mentioned earlier, the gear, the cyanids, any injuries. Another not as obvious entanglement, but is becoming more of an issue, is actually monofilament entanglements. When we think about whale entanglements, you think about like thick rope from a lobster trap or some really heavy commercial fishing gear. But this is actually becoming more of a threat, which is monofilament entanglements that you might see on like a tuna rod. These are both instances of monofilament entanglements. On the left, that's a calf from last year that has a wrap of an entanglement around their pectoral flipper. And it is slowly amputating that flipper. And then on the right is a calf from this summer that we responded to maybe 15 times. And this is another one. This is another monofilament entanglement, and you can actually see underneath there's a lure that's stuck to it. Doing the same thing. These are both calves. They're getting bigger as they're growing. These monofilament entanglements are slowly amputating body parts. So a little bit harder to see. But again, if you're seeing injuries, really obvious injuries, or you may not be able to see the line right away, but that's an indicator that there's something happening. So if you come across any of these things, you can call us or your local response networks. For us, you're going to call our entanglement hotline, which is 1-800-900-3622. And you will reach someone like me, a lovely one of my team members. You will call us, and you can tell us what you're seeing. We can help assess whether or not the animal is actually entangled, but if you're ever concerned, you should always report any animals in distress. So if it is an entangled animal, we do always ask if you're able to, if you are the person reporting and you're safe and you have enough endurance to be able to stand by the animal while we mount a response. Safety is of the utmost concern, obviously. For entangled animals, there could be lots of line in the water that can easily get caught in props. So it's always important anytime you're around an animal, but particularly around an entangled animal, to maintain a safe distance. And the whale might exhibit different behaviors. If they're entangled, it could be really unpredictable. So again, safe distance. We have a really fast response time. We can only get there so fast if you are a great deal of distance away from our boat. So we'll be there as fast as we can, but having somebody who can stand by is really, really helpful for us to be able to get there and launch a response in a quick amount of time. So if we're searching an area and it's been 20 minutes since anyone's seen the whale, we're searching 12 miles. And then with every subsequent minute that we can't find the animal, it might be moving in a different direction. The search area is increasing exponentially. So after an hour, we're searching 110 square miles. And after 2 hours since the whale's last been seen, it could be 450 square miles. So I can't even tell you the number of times this summer we got a call about somebody. They're like, oh yeah, I saw an entangled animal on my way back in. Here's where it was. We go out there, we spend all day looking, we never find it. So while someone's standing by, we are coming there as fast as possible. We think of ourselves that we're like firefighters, but for whales, every member of our team has made the sacrifice. We are on call from sunup to sundown, and anytime we choose to stay, well, we have to stay within 20 minutes of our boat. Really limits your activities. So you can be in the middle of making dinner, get a call, you're on your way to the boat. So once we get a report, we're activating like those firemen. We're heading to the boat as quick as possible, and then are heading to the area where the whale's been reported. And while heading there, we're trying to make an assessment of how the whale's entangled and come up with a plan for our response. The whole time throughout a response, we're taking data, taking pictures, and again, stressing the importance of maintaining a safe distance. If you are standing by, we might be asking you certain questions like, what can you see? Were you able to take any pictures? We might ask you to send those things to us because it can help us inform our plan as we're transiting. But again, maintaining a safe distance, but having information about what we're heading into is really helpful. So once we arrive, almost always the first thing we'll do is establish a control line. So this is for a number of reasons. One, we do this using a grapple like I showed you before. Again, that's this tool. This will be attached to 60 feet of line, and at the end of it, there will be a giant buoy. And this is for a number of reasons. First, it's the beginning of the kegging process. So it's the first bit of drag that we're gonna add onto the animal. Hopefully will help us slow it down a little bit, but mostly because it will give us access to the entanglement. We can use that control line to begin working our way closer to the animal in our inflatable vessel. It also marks their location. If the whale goes on a dive, usually the buoy will come up before the whale will, and so we can know, oh, it's gonna come up over there, the buoy just came up. But it can also be used, this control line, to add a telemetry buoy. A telemetry buoy is this green buoy down on the bottom, and on that is a satellite tag, which can help us track the animal if we can't finish responding to it in one day, or if the weather is too crappy, if for whatever reason we need to relocate that animal at a later time. Right. Oh, we also use a control line to, like I said, give us access to the entanglement, and we like to do that from a softer boat, so we use our inflatable for a number of reasons. One, it's smaller, more navigable, but also if the whale's coming in contact with something inflatable, it's a lot easier on them than hitting the bottom of a metal boat. So once we have that control line, we'll launch our inflatable, and we begin working up the entanglement to try to get close to the whale as possible. You do that by manually pulling up, very, very tiring, and conduct an assessment of how the whale is entangled. We either do that visually with our eyes, either looking at it with your eyes above the water, or putting goggles on, sticking your head over the side of the boat under the water, getting yourself all soaking wet. We also have underwater cameras that we'll use sometimes to review footage. And then once we have an understanding of how the whale is entangled, we feel confident, we'll begin the kegging process usually. Like I said, kegging is the idea that you're going to slow down an animal. You're adding as much drag as possible. It will make them spend more time at the surface. It'll be really hard to pull underneath the water. Hopefully slow them down, maybe stop them. But for the most part, again, just trying to make them easier to work on. The buoys are will create the most drag the closer they are to the animal. So a lot of times we'll do what's called leapfrogging the buoys, which is just moving them up as we move closer to the whale. So this next video I'll show you is a video of a whale that's kegged. This is a right whale that we put a bunch of drag on. And this whale has pretty much every buoy we have. That's our little inflatable boat. And as well at the front, it has a telemetry buoy. That little green buoy at the front is the telemetry buoy with the satellite tag. And then behind it is 4 or 5 different buoys, as well as a sea anchor. So that's the most drag we can possibly put on is a sea anchor. So once we get close enough to the animal, if needed, we will use knives to cut gear off of the animal. The safest position we can be in is behind the flukes for a number of reasons. One, it lets you see the whole whale, and if they do anything crazy, it's just going to push you away. So if they start thrashing with their tails, it will push you back. And so for the most part, we like to stay right behind their flukes, which means you have to reach forward over their body with a 30-foot pole and a knife at the end to try to make a cut into the entangling gear. So I have a video of that. So in this video, the boat's not under power. They're being completely dragged by the animal. All of that white water is being created by a whale pulling a boat with 3 people in it. And so somebody's holding on to the entangling gear that goes to the fluke. And then another team member is going to reach forward with a knife at the end of a painter's pole and make a cut on the left side of the tail. So they're going to pull up, they're pulling up, reaching forward, making a cut on that line. Another type of cutting tool we have is used in instances where we need to maintain more distance from the whale. Like I said, all of our tools are kind of prioritized towards safety, keeping ourselves as far away from the animal as we can be while still being close enough to do the work. So in an instance like this where there's just a wrap with a big jumble, this is really hard to access. There's not a lot trailing for us to grab onto in our inflatable. So we might use something called the cutting grapple, which is a monster-looking tool. But it's basically the same thing as this. It's a grapple with 4 tines, but instead of in each tine, there will be a knife blade. And so this is also be attached to a 60-shot of line and a buoy. And the idea is, in an instance like this, you would throw the cutting grapple, hoping to grab onto that jumble of rope. The cutting grapple will attach on, and then the drag from the buoy will pull it through to cut through all of that line, and the whale will be gear-free. And that's exactly what happened, and I'll show you a clip of that. So someone's going to throw a grapple at that jumble of line. It will grab on, the buoy will go out, and then the drag from the buoy will pull all of those knife blades and the grapple across that jumble and make the cut. So here's pretty crappy conditions. The whale is moving really fast, really hard to mount a response in these conditions. Throw the grapple, there's the line. Line goes tight, it's attached to the line, it's attached to the whale. And then the buoy is going to go out. All that drag from the whale is going to pull it through. And now the buoy has gone slack, so the cut was made, and the whale is gear-free. So here's a case that we did this summer. This was a whale that was called in July. We got a call from a tuna fisherman up on Stellwagen. He said, hey, I'm out tuna fishing. There's a mom and a calf here, and one of them is trailing buoys. I don't know which one. So we got that call. 15 minutes, we were at the boat. We launched our boat, and we headed out towards this location. We also knew that NEFSC, which is the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, was flying an aerial survey nearby, so we asked them if they could come fly the area and provide some backup for us to get another view of what we were seeing. When we got on site, we found out that it was the mom that was entangled, not the calf, but they were still together. And so mom was entangled, trailing these 2 orange buoys, and this is the response that took place. So we're on IBIS, our primary boat now. We're going to establish a control line, like I mentioned. So throw a grapple, it catches onto the line with those 2 buoys, and they're going to attach it with that big buoy at the end. So then they launch the inflatable boat, go out, grab onto the control line, and at this point, the engine of the inflatable is lifted, And everything forward is either manpower or whale power. So any forward momentum they make is because you're pulling up physically, and any forward progress that you're happening is because the whale is dragging you. So here they're slowly working their way up the control line, trying to get closer to the whale. That's what's happening. And when we first started this response, it was great conditions. You can see it's pretty flat, calm, beautiful day, not super windy. Here they've just made it past where the grapple is. So they're going to add their first buoy, start kegging the animal. And obviously, like I mentioned, very dynamic process, trying to tie a knot while the line is super tight and people are yelling and you're in an inflatable boat being pulled by a whale is pretty difficult. But they're working together pretty well. Again, at this point, the whale was moving pretty slowly, so they didn't have a lot of drag to fight. Mothers and calves can be kind of unpredictable. You don't really know what the calf's going to do. The mom might behave differently because she has a calf with her. So here they just cut off everything behind their last buoy, and they're going to start kegging, and they're going to add another buoy. And with these days, it's super long. It's a lot of the same thing over and over again as things change, as you get more information. And when they started doing this response, we were working under the assumption that the fluke wasn't involved. We thought it was a pretty straightforward entanglement just by the way the line was behaving. But as they get a closer look and as the plane arrived, we confirmed that it was just a mouth entanglement, so line straight through the mouth. So what likely happened was there was a vertical line from the buoy down to a trap of some kind. Mom was swimming with her mouth open, eating something, swam into that line, got it through her mouth. Humpbacks are baleen whales. They don't have teeth. They have no way of getting that line out on their own. So now what they're doing is leapfrogging the buoys. Like I mentioned, they're trying to move it closer to the whale. So the closer the buoys are, the more she's going to feel that drag. The less she's going to want to dive, the more time she'll spend at the surface, and hopefully the slower she will go. So they're getting closer to the animal. They're getting close. There's mom and calf on the right side. And you're always trying to bear in mind, like, what is calf doing while you're getting closer? And again, great sea conditions, not a lot of boats around, so you don't have to worry about being dragged into somebody's gear, props, or whatever. So it was actually really great. They got a closer look, and they were able to see that, in fact, it was a mouth entanglement. Nothing else was involved. So now they're going to back down the line and go get a knife at the end of that 30-foot pole. Because the idea here is they'll get back close to her fluke. They'll reach forward with the knife, make a cut on the left side of her mouth. And what that will do is it'll create kind of an asymmetrical amount of drag. So it's a really short amount of line out of her left mouth and then a bunch of line out of her right. So the next time she opens her mouth, it'll all just slip through and she'll shed it. That's the idea. So here, again, this is a little frustrating because you just lost all that progress you made. You did all of that effort to pull yourself close to the whale, and now you got to go back and get a knife. So we drove up to them, gave them a knife at the end of a pole. And sometimes people ask, why don't you just have a knife ready? But it's kind of hard to have a knife bouncing around an inflatable boat if you don't need one right away. So again, no motor on this boat. This boat is not underpowered in any way. All of this white water is completely from the drag of the animal. So they're holding tension on the line, and they've worked their way back up to where they were before. Those two buoys mark their last location, and now they've gotten back up to where they are, and there's someone ready to make a cut. I know these videos can be a little confusing, so.
Using the camera on the side of the helmet?
Yeah, so it's a GoPro on the helmet, either on the top or on the side. I feel like the top ones are usually a little bit better, but also if it's from the person in the front, all you're seeing is the bow of the boat. So usually the person in the back has a little bit of a better view. So imagine you're doing this for hours. It's really, really tiring, pretty exhausting. And again, this whale is still considered being well-behaved. Like, it's, you know, a simple entanglement with a well-behaved whale, and it still is really, really tiring, really, really difficult work. So now they're within a body length of the animal. So the next time they stand up, you'll see the whale comes up and they're relatively close. And so they're going to try to get in a good position to make a cut. And so they want to get as close as they can to the flukes. And then the person in the blue shirt is going to reach forward and try to cut that line. Calf's on the right side, so calf's hopefully not going to get in the way. But they're staying under the water a lot. They can see the shadow of the boat, so they don't want to come up because they can see you. And in the last clip, you can see coming out of the distance is a very big Navy boat. And unfortunately, that Navy boat spooked Mom, and she took off in the opposite direction. So all of a sudden, we went from a really nice, well-behaved animal to a very, very fast-swimming animal. Again, boat's not under power, water is coming over the front of it. This is one whale dragging a boat with 3 people in it. So they were close enough, they tried to make that cut. Unfortunately, Mom got spooked by something else that wasn't us. And they have to lose all of that progress they just made. So she went too fast, they didn't have control, they had to back down, and now let the buoys take some of that drag. So when you have buoys in between you and the whale, you're not holding on to as much of it. And she is going even faster still. So she has taken off, she has gone fast, they're no longer in a good position to make a cut. But good news in this scenario was, when she took off, she started moving faster. She felt all of that drag more because they had moved it closer to her. And she opened her mouth at some point, and the drag from the boat and all of the buoys was enough that when she opened her mouth, it actually pulled all of the line free. So it's all gone slack. They've pulled all of the line out of her mouth, and she's gear free. So they did all of that without actually making a cut in this instance. So like I said, every entanglement is different. We have all of these fancy tools for making different types of cuts. But sometimes good old-fashioned kegging is just the best way to go. So then all of this line was through her mouth, just still pulling more and more rope. I think there was over 160 feet of rope. And there's Mom and calf gear free. Success. And we saw them a number of other times that season, calf nursing happily, Mom feeding. By all accounts, a success story. So that was a great case from this summer. But when she took off, she took off. She was quite fast. So whales are not the only thing that get entangled in the Cape. We also deal with a lot of entangled turtles. Leatherback turtles often get caught in fishing gear while they're here from May to November. We get a lot of reports from fishermen who go out to check their gear and they go, there's a turtle in it. Or wreck boaters who are coming back in and they say, oh, I see this weird bobbing buoy, and they went over and it's attached to a leatherback turtle. So we've disentangled over 150 turtles since we began the program. And we love to get reports in. We get a lot of reports out of Chatham. So if you guys are ever out and see a turtle, feel free to let us know. You may think that a turtle is easier than a whale to work with, and that is true. They're not the size of a school bus. But turtles are, specifically leatherbacks, are particularly difficult in their own right. They can be over 400, 500 pounds. They're the size of you. They are fully capable of pulling you off your boat into the water, and have. Luckily, like I said, our boat is specifically modified to do this kind of work. And so a lot of the techniques are the same. We come across an entangled turtle, we'll use our grapple to grapple onto the gear. We can pull them alongside of the boat. We take biometrics of all the turtles, so how long they are, how big they are. We take note of any injuries we're seeing, make note of how long we think they've been in the gear. And then we also deploy pit tags in all of our turtles, which is similar to like a chip that you would put in your dog. And so even though it may be smaller than a whale, it's still a high-risk activity, and it's always better to call a trained entanglement responder if you come across an entangled turtle. And that's because with turtles, it's pretty easy. If you make a cut, you might leave something still on the animal that could lead to death for them. So when we do our entanglement responses, we don't make any cuts on turtles. We unwrap all of the rope manually, and then often we'll reset the gear for the fishermen so it can go back to being, well, a lobster trap or whatever it's supposed to be instead of trapped on a turtle. So this is just a video of what turtle entanglement looks like. This guy was in pretty rough condition. You can see there's lots of wounds. It's pretty deeply cut into his flippers and his neck, so he'd been entangled for a long time with that rope rubbing. And they're just unwrapping it like a puzzle, just doing it from one side to the other until they have all of the gear in hand to make sure that they don't leave like a wrap around the neck. And And so moving the buoys. And once they unwrap the neck, this guy will be free. Again, you can see all of those rub marks on the carapace or the shell, and then in all of the joints where he was entangled. So they're going to set him free right here. Yay. So in addition to our disentanglement work with turtles, we collaborate with the New England Aquarium, which does a lot of work on sea turtles. With Kara Dodge, who was doing her PhD, she came out with us, disentangled a few turtles, and then satellite tagged them after as a metric to see how successful they were after they were set free. Satellite tags are done by suction cup. You basically just like suction them onto the shells. So it's kind of a short-term tag to see how them bopping around the bay after you take them out at some rope. Turtles, sometimes you can have repeat offenders. We can disentangle the same turtle 3 times over the course of the summer if they're unlucky enough. But most of the time, you can tag them and see that they go on to move around the Cape and then move out once their time is up. We also do with the aquarium, we also do some more aggressive tagging, some more long-term tags. So this is a turtle that we disentangled this summer in July, actually our first turtle of the year, off of Truro. So we got a call from somebody who was coming out of the Pamet, found this turtle in their gear. We came out, we disentangled it. The New England Aquarium came out and met us, and then installed a tag on the turtle that's actually still transmitting. So this track is until the end of February, but it's still going right now. So this turtle is still swimming off, stayed in the Cape for a few weeks, then left, spent most of the fall off of the mid-Atlantic, and is now heading south for like a nice tropical winter, a little bit of a snowbird of this turtle. I mentioned in the past the Atlantic Large Whale Disentanglement Network, but like I said, entanglement is a global problem. So in about 2011, the Center for Coastal Studies, David Mattila, partnered with the International Whaling Commission to establish the GWERN, which is the Global Whale Entanglement Response Network. And as a part of that, we host trainings for people around the world. So we've been doing this work for a really long time. We want people to go on to use our techniques in other places so that they can free animals. So we often have people come in collaboration with their government, with NOAA, with our government, to come here to get training. So these are examples of people we had from Kenya and Brazil who came here as apprentices to learn our techniques, and then they bring those techniques back with them to their home countries and help establish networks and responders in their areas. So just really great collaboration. So what we've learned from all of these years of doing entanglement work is that entanglement, again, is an issue wherever whales and fishing gear overlap. It's not discriminatory between a certain type of fisheries or a certain type of whale. And in some populations, it is a severe conservation concern. And while disentanglement has helped many individual whales, it's not considered a solution to the entanglement problem, again, because most entanglements are not witnessed and most are not reported at all. And of the ones that are reported, only a small percentage of them can actually be found and helped. So the information collected during disentanglement helps us understand the problems. We use it to inform management, innovate tools, and generate ideas for mitigation. But it just continually highlights that a big issue, the biggest problem, is the rope itself. So going back to this image, you're a whale the size of a school bus. You have to navigate this area anyway, and there's going to be fisheries. And the fishing gear is going to look like this. If I were to ask you, what would you suggest to try to keep this whale from getting entangled? Any ideas?
You gotta find an alternative to the rope.
Yeah, exactly.
Self-supporting.
So if you can find an alternative to rope, hopefully the animal can swim through and not get entangled. So currently, the big push is for on-demand fishing, ropeless fishing. So like I mentioned, we've learned over the years that the issue is not fishing, it is rope itself. So trying to find ways to fish without having line in the water column is a big developmental goal for a lot of fisheries. And there are lots of different technology that's being developed to find different ways of on-demand fishery. How can you as a fisherman show up, get your trap without the use of rope? And so many of these techniques people are fishing with this today. There are ropeless fisheries out there. There's this gear out there in the bay. But again, it's very expensive. And so we're trying to find ways to mitigate the cost so that fishermen are not being saddled with the burden of having to switch out their gear with this more expensive gear, because it's really not at the point where it's accessible enough to be the new modern fishery. But it's getting there, and this is our goal for mitigating entanglement in the future. So just to wrap it all up, how you can help: if you come across an entangled animal, call us. If you're concerned, call us. You'll talk to somebody who's hopefully nice like me and I'm not cranky. And if you're in the position where it's safe to do so and you feel comfortable, stand by if possible. We'll be getting there as soon as we can. Spread awareness about the issue, and if you can, support research and response efforts like those at the Center for Coastal Studies. And thank you guys for being here.
So, do you have any questions from the audience?
One quick question.
There you go.
With all the perturbation in federal funding in the last month or two, how exposed is the Center for Coastal Studies to all that?
That's a good question. For people on Zoom, somebody in the room asked about, with the uncertainty around federal funding, how does that look for our work? Yeah, so the center does receive federal funding in the form of grants and proposals or contracts. So it's definitely a big question mark for us, trying to figure out, moving forward, how much of our funding can we count on. Fortunately, the center is not 100% federally funded. We rely on a lot of donations and gifts from really lovely benefactors. So we do have a diversity of funding sources, but we'll definitely be looking to further diversify those in the future. And just looking forward to serving our community to try to, luckily people have been really fortunate upon hearing the news about the loss of some of our federal funding, have been responding in kind to try to rectify some of the loss of our budget. But did that answer your question, hopefully? Yeah.
Workouts are done to develop the upper body strength that's necessary.
That's a good question. I mean, you can always come train with me. No, I'm kidding. No, it is definitely, I mean, the job itself is a workout. We do a lot of training in the harbor in the off season and on days where it's windy. We'll do a lot of training, practicing a lot of these maneuvers. So you do build up some of the muscle memory and some of the endurance. But it was definitely something when I came here as an intern, I was kind of like, I'll go for nice long runs on the seashore. And then I was like, no, I got this job, and I was like, I do have to get back in the gym. But it is a lot of shoulder work. The day after entanglement, everyone's always has like noodle arms. But it's also definitely really hard. It's hard on the body over time. And we have a lot of equipment that we get that you wouldn't think about. Like we all purchase knee pads. You spend a lot of time bracing yourself against a metal boat, and so you get bruised. So you find ways to kind of innovate, and it's very funny to see the ways that people find little adaptations, like lots of gardening type equipment that you get for kneeling a lot. I could show you the video again if you're interested, but you can see the person at the bow does have knee pads on for doing all of that work. We all wear gloves. But for me, the biggest thing is you have to build up a lot of grip strength. Like it's hard having to pull up towards the animal. Right. But even just maintaining your grip on the rope is really, really difficult. So,
are any of the tools actually powered or all just hand tools?
The disentanglement tools are mostly hand tools, but we do have like a number, we have like our GoPros, and we have a lot of pole-mounted cameras and other equipment that's more technologically advanced. In other areas, they are using kind of different types of technology to do disentanglement work. Here, if you need to make a cut underwater, for the most part, somebody will stick their head underwater and help guide the pole, but in other areas, they attach cameras to the end of the poles.
Okay, but the actual cutting equipment itself is all manual equipment?
For the most part, yeah. Yeah, when they did that case in New York, like I mentioned, they did end up having to get a handsaw to cut through the cable, but for the most part, that's not something that we stock on our boat, just because electricity and water and boats don't really mix, so. Okay,
the one simple question is, do whales go south for the winter? I think I know the answer.
Yeah, for most whales do. The right whales do not. The right whales come up here in the winter, so it really depends on the species. But yeah, for the most part, like our humpbacks, our fin whales, they do females, we don't actually know where a lot of them go in the off season, but humpbacks go south to the breeding grounds, and so they're off of the Caribbean right
In
now.
the Pacific, there's a similar migration back and forth?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And lastly, question about the makeup of the teams. Typically, how much do they work in a given week, and what is the makeup of them as far as women and men are concerned?
That's a good question. Our team work week can really depend on like the seasonality. In the summer, we spend really lots of days in the water. I think we ended up last season, I almost had 500 hours at sea, so it's a lot of really long hours. And then in the winter, you might like go home at 3 p.m. or you recoup your time in other ways. But also, again, like you're on call 24 or from sunup to sundown. We maintain our hotline. That if you're holding the hotline, you have it for a week at a time. So like I have the hotline right now. You have to be aware of that 24/7 because you can get calls at any time. People call us from all over the world. Like I got a call last week from somebody in California, and you have to be like, this is the wrong number. But people are calling because they are concerned about an animal, and we want to help direct them to the right person. As far as our makeup, historically, I'm not super familiar with what it was like in the past. Right now, there are 4 of us, 2 men, 2 women, but there definitely has been, in the past, a concept of disentanglement as kind of men's work, that it's something you have to be really strong and really machismo to do, but no one is ever going to be strong enough to overpower a whale, and there's definitely been, I'm really grateful because there's, you're never going to overpower a whale, but you're going to have to outsmart it, and so there's definitely a level of physicality that's involved. So I think in general, our team does skew younger than some other departments might be. Like I said, because it is really physically demanding, it is really hard on the body, but it's not really something that is super gendered that way, if that makes sense.
About how long does someone typically do that work before they go, okay, enough?
Some people do it their whole lives. My boss, Scott Landry, the director of our program, has been doing it since, I believe, the 90s. And my coworker, Bob Lynch, he's been doing this for about 15 years. So some people make it their whole lives. Some people, it will be just kind of like a nice snapshot. It's an experience they'll do for a little bit. But for the most part, everyone who does entanglement work will always care about whales. And so they usually will stay in the field, but maybe might move into a management role or might move into more of a data role, if that makes sense. But there's no metric. It really depends on what you as a person are capable of doing. And also, if you may not be able to do the physical work in the inflatable, but you will probably still be an excellent boat operator, and so you can contribute to the team in ways that are less
Physically
physical.
demanding.
Yeah.
I got it. Sure. Thank you, Morgan. Appreciate it. I think you filled in a lot of gaps in my understanding of what's involved in this entanglement, so it was much appreciated. We have for you, as a token of our appreciation, this genuine Chatham Marconi logo ball cap, and you'll be receiving a year's membership at the sustaining level as well for your efforts. We thank you very much.
Thank you.